All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're heading straight into the core of React. You know, the React module, you can think of it kind of like the engine room, yeah, where all the magic happens. We're using this really interesting script called Understanding the Core React module to help guide us. It's like getting a sneak peek behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely a unique perspective on how React actually functions, almost like you're seeing the developer's thought process.
So let's start at the very beginning of this React module. There's a file called index.js. What's so important about this file?
Well, think of it as the central control panel. Index.js connects to all the different parts that make React, well, React. It pulls in all these submodules like React base classes, React children, React element, each with its own specific function, of course.
Oh, interesting. So index.js is basically bringing all these different pieces together, like some sort of
Yeah.
I don't know, like a toolbox.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And one of the most important tools in this toolbox is a function called React.createElement. Now, this is how developers actually create the building blocks of a React application.
You mean those, what are they called, React elements?
Exactly.
So how does this React.create element actually work? Can you break it down a bit?
Okay, so imagine you want to create a button on a web page, right? With React.createElement, you tell it, okay, I want a button element. Then you define its properties, like how it should look or what it should do when you click it. And you could even include any other elements that should be inside the button, like text. React.createElement takes all those instructions and puts them into a format that React can understand.
Ah, so it's like a recipe for making user interface elements.
You got it. And here's where it gets really cool. Every time React.createElement is called, it returns this simple object that represents that element. And all these objects together form what we call the virtual DOM.
Right, the virtual DOM. I've heard about it, but it's always felt a bit, I don't know, mysterious. What makes it so important in the grand scheme of things?
Okay, well, think of the virtual DOM like a blueprint. It's a lightweight representation of your user interface. And React uses it to, well, make updates really efficiently. Instead of refreshing the entire page every time something changes, React compares the virtual DOM to, its previous state. And by figuring out the differences, it knows exactly what needs to change in the actual browser DOM.
The browser DOM, now that's the actual structure the browser uses to display the web page, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of like instead of redrawing an entire picture every time you make a small change, you just update the parts that need updating.
You got it. That's a great way to put it. And that's a big part of what makes React so performant. Especially when you're working with really complex applications with tons of elements, it just creates a much smoother, faster experience for the user.
So React.createElement is really playing this critical role in building this virtual DOM, and understanding that gives us a better understanding of how React works, like a behind the scenes. Are there any other essential tools that this core module provides?
Yeah, absolutely. Along with React.createElement, the React module exports several other, well, crucial tools. One is React.component. Think of it as a blueprint for building, more complex features in your application. Like say you want to create a reusable comment section for your website. You could use React.component to define its structure and behavior.
Yeah.
Then it's super easy to integrate that comment section into different parts of your application.
So essentially, React.component helps keep your code organized and avoids repetition.
Exactly. Like having these pre-designed building blocks.
Nice.
And then building on React.component, there's also React.peerComponent. Now this is where things get really efficient.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, React Peer Component basically prevents unnecessary work.
Unnecessary work? How so?
It only updates a component if its data has actually changed. It's like it knows when it needs to re-render and when it can just skip the whole process.
Wow, that's pretty smart.
Right. Like imagine a stock ticker that constantly updates stock prices. Using React Peer Component there could really boost performance.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. So you've got React.createElement, building the virtual DOM, React.component, and React.peerComponent, helping us build efficient and organized components. Anything else we should know about this React module before we move on?
Oh yeah, there's one more tool I want to mention, React.memo. Think of it like a memory booster for functional components. It remembers the results of a function. So if it gets the same input again, it can just skip the calculation and use the cache result. This can really speed up parts of your application that involve complex calculations or large amounts of data.
Ah, so it's like smart caching for specific parts of the app.
Exactly.
That's really clever.
There's one more, React.fragment. Now this one might seem a little less exciting at first, but it plays a crucial role in keeping your code nice and tidy.
Oh, how so?
It basically lets you group multiple elements together. without adding extra nodes to the actual DOM structure, which can be really helpful for styling and accessibility.
So it's kind of like bundling things together neatly behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that we have a good understanding of the core tools provided by the React module, I'm really curious to see how they all work together to create that, that React magic.
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring just that, focusing on the virtual DOM and how it all comes together to make React so efficient.
Sounds good to me. Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the React module. We've already talked about the core tools. Now I'm excited to see how they all fit together in practice.
Okay, so let's dive a bit deeper into that virtual DOM concept. Remember, it's like a lightweight representation of your user interface. React uses it to make updates super efficiently.
Right, like a blueprint that React can quickly analyze to see what needs changing when the data updates. So how does React.createElement fit into all of this? Well, each time you call React.createElement, it generates a simple object describing that specific element, right? This object, it includes the element's type. Things like its properties, like styling or event handlers, and any children it might have.
Okay, so each button, each text input, each image, they all become one of these objects in the virtual DOM.
Precisely. And all these objects together, they form a tree-like structure, mirroring the hierarchy of your actual web page. And because they're just plain JavaScript objects, React can work with them really efficiently.
I see. So React can create this virtual representation using React.createElement. But how does it know when to update the actual web page and what to update?
That's where the reconciliation process comes in. React uses this, well, it's a pretty clever algorithm, to compare the current virtual DOM with the previous one. And by finding the differences, it knows exactly which parts of the actual web page need to be changed.
So it's not just constantly refreshing the entire page. That would be pretty resource intensive, I imagine. Exactly. React's way more targeted than that. It just pinpoints the elements that need to be added, removed, or modified, so you get much faster and smoother updates. That's one of the key reasons React apps feel so responsive.
Wow, there's a lot of optimization happening behind the scenes. So how do components play into this whole reconciliation process?
Components, especially those built with React.component and React.pureComponent, they play a crucial role in managing those updates. Each component can manage its own little piece of the virtual DOM.
So each component is responsible for its own little zone within the virtual DOM.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. So when something changes within a component, like a user enters some text or clicks a button, the component re-renders its own section of the virtual DOM.
Gotcha. And then React comes in, does its reconciliation magic, compares the updated section with the previous version, and then makes the necessary changes on the actual web page.
Precisely. This component-based approach, it allows React to break down updates into smaller, more manageable chunks, which again improves efficiency even more.
Now, you mentioned React Pure Component as being a more efficient type of component. Can you remind us how that works again?
Sure. React Pure Component has this built-in mechanism to prevent, unnecessary re-renders. It basically performs a shallow comparison of its properties and state, the data it's working with, to determine if anything is actually changed. If nothing's changed, it just skips the re-render entirely.
So it's like it's saying, hey, I've already done the work for this data. No need to do it again unless something's different.
Exactly. This can be a huge performance win, especially for components that get updated frequently, but don't always need a full re-render, like a news feed that constantly updates with new articles. It only needs to re-render the specific articles that have changed, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and how about React.memo? We talked about that earlier. How does that contribute to optimization?
React.memo provides a similar kind of optimization, but for functional components. It basically remembers the result of a component's render function, based on its input properties, of course. So if the component gets the same properties again, React.memo just returns that cached result. No need to run the whole function again.
So it's like smart caching, but specifically for functional components.
You got it. Really helpful for computationally expensive components, or those that render a ton of data.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The virtual DOM, the reconciliation process, these optimized components. It's like a well-oiled machine working to give users a seamless and efficient experience.
It really is. And we haven't even talked about how React interacts with the actual browser DOM to bring your application to life on the screen.
Oh, yeah. That's the final piece of the puzzle, isn't it? I'm ready to learn about that.
All right, let's do it.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into React. We've made it all the way to the virtual DOM and learned about all sorts of optimizations. Now it's time to connect all of this to what we actually see on a web page, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is where the interaction between the virtual DOM and the browser DOM comes into play. Remember the browser DOM? It's that tree-like structure representing all the elements on a web page, the actual content that users see and interact with.
Right, right. So it's like the real world version of React's virtual representation. How does React bridge the gap between these two?
Well, React has this reconciliation algorithm. It figures out the most efficient way to update the browser DOM, based on the changes in the virtual DOM, of course. So instead of refreshing the entire page, React gets really specific. It identifies the elements that need to be added, removed, or changed.
So it's a much more targeted and efficient approach than just reloading the whole page every time something changes.
Exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
imagine a surgeon making these precise incisions instead of performing a full-body transplant, right? That's what React's doing with the DOM. And that's why React applications can feel so smooth and responsive.
Even when dealing with complex updates, it's amazing how much optimization is going on under the hood. Does this efficiency extend to how React handles events too, like clicks or key presses?
Oh, absolutely. React sets up these event listeners on DOM elements to capture those user interactions. Think of them like these tiny sensors, just waiting for something specific to happen. When a user clicks a button, the listener notifies React.
Okay. So it's like this chain reaction. Event triggers a listener, which tells React, and then updates happen in the virtual DOM, which then ultimately lead to changes on the web page.
Precisely. And React handles all of this super efficiently.
It really does feel like web pages respond instantly nowadays. This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for how React works. It's like you're peeking behind the curtain to see all these intricate mechanisms that create these smooth and interactive experiences we all just take for granted.
It's pretty cool, right? It's a testament to the thoughtfulness of React's design. By taking care of all the complex DOM manipulation behind the scenes, React lets developers focus on building the logic and features.
Without getting bogged down in all the low-level details.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners about this interaction between React and the browser DOM?
I'd say the key takeaway is React's focus on declarative programming. Basically, you tell React what you want the UI to look like, and React takes care of making it happen efficiently.
It figures out the how, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. This declarative approach really simplifies development, makes code more readable, easier to maintain.
It sounds like React takes care of a lot of the heavy lifting, so developers can focus on the bigger picture.
You got it, this balance between control and abstraction. It's a big part of why React is so popular.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the heart of React. We've journeyed through the React module, explored the virtual DOM, and seen how it all connects to the browser DOM to create these dynamic and responsive web applications.
It's been quite a journey. Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone a deeper understanding of how React works and the principles behind its efficiency.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of your React journey, listeners. There's still so much to learn and explore. Advanced hooks, state management libraries, and so much more.
So keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep building amazing things with React.
That's all for this deep dive. Until next time, happy coding, everyone.